Hello, my name is Adam Stover,
I'm Juan Garcia,
and this is
Kristin Heimpel.
and we're here today to ask her a couple questions about mental health. We're wanting to learn more and sort of spread awareness in the community.
First and foremost, can you tell me a little bit about yourself before we begin the interview?
Absolutely. So my name is Kristin Heimpel. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. Right now I work for the school system in a high school setting as a school social worker.
Awesome. And our first question today is what are the most pending mental health issues in our youth today?
Right. So I would say some of the most prevalent mental health issues that our youth are facing is just going to be struggling finding out what coping skills are going to work, resiliency and working through any issues that may come up, whether it's stress or anxiety at home or in school, and then going back to those coping skills and figuring out which ones are going to best meet the situation that child is facing.
What do you think are some signs of mental health issues within our youth?
Oh, signs. A lot of them are going to present as like a sense of being overwhelmed. And so you kind of see them getting flustered, unable to maybe manage multiple tasks at one time, not knowing what to do next. That's a question like, what do I do next? Like, what happens next? How do I manage multiple classes or athletics with maybe a church role or a club role as well, and just trying to get that all sorted out so that they can, get through that using the coping skills that they may or may not have or that they may learn, so that they can manage all the stuff that's being asked of them.
What do you think has caused that issue to evolve to such a high level within our youth today?
So like I said, I'm in a high school setting. We see a lot of students right now struggling with the transition, coming in from middle school to high school. There's a lot of big differences besides the obvious coming from middle school to high school. So you go from this, big fish in a small pond to now you're a small fish in a big pond. GPA starts counting. That's a big stressor for a lot of students. Your class, the way it's structured is different. You add in more clubs, more athletics, and more just demands on those individuals. You have kids that are studying to drive and then kids that start looking at college. And so as the demands get higher, they're just struggling getting everything lined up and figuring out how they work through each one step by step.
Yeah, I do think the academic stress plays a big part in it. And what are some ways that we can cope with that, do you think?
So I like to break things down into small steps so that, you have all these tasks that the student wants to complete. Figuring out from the student, what's their priority right now? What is the one that is taking the most time and taking, the most energy for them? And then breaking it down, baby steps. So instead of just addressing everything as a whole and trying to spend 5 minutes doing this activity and 5 minutes doing this activity, breaking it down. So we're gonna complete this one and then we can take it off the table. And then we're gonna do the next step, take that off the table. And sometimes that helps students kind of realize, okay, this is what's important. And if I can get this task done, then this next task is gonna come a little bit easier. And then that kind of trickles down to where they can manage it. Because big picture is overwhelming, and making it into small manageable steps and then doing those regular check-ins of like, okay, have we finished step 2? Okay, this is how we now go into step 3. And so that's what I've found to work with most kids is just making their workload more manageable.
And is the adult experience similar to the youth, or is it just go away after you turn into an adult?
Nothing goes away as an adult, I promise. So I like to think of it as just like we all have a toolbox, right? And when you're a youth, and if you can get those appropriate and those helpful tools in your toolbox, and you can kind of learn which tool to use in which situation, then as an adult, you have a little bit better idea which one to pull out. But adults have the same stress. We have the same concerns. We have the same freakouts over a workload or when you start having children and having to be in more than one place at one time. But it just becomes a muscle memory. So the more you do it and the more you use the appropriate tools or coping skills, they come a little bit more natural. But I can assure you that the adults out here are struggling just as much as the youth. And it's just an overtime process of, like I said, that muscle memory kind of coming into play.
Awesome. So I have a little brother, and he's in middle school right now. How can I help him at that young age?
Middle school is such a hard age, it really is. And that transition from that carefree, we get recess, elementary, and then they kind of start prepping you in middle school by giving you a little bit more structure and splitting up your classes. Advice I would give is that it's okay to say no. I think we have some kids that want to do everything, and we want them to be successful, and if there's somebody that can be pushed to do more than the bare minimum, then absolutely push. But I think a lot of kids struggle with saying no, and so some kids kind of come into high school and maybe take too many advanced classes right off the bat, and that becomes a huge stressor. And it kind of makes them lose a little bit of motivation if they're not being as successful as maybe they were in 7th or 8th grade. So maybe just more manageable loads on them would be good. To have fun and be a little bit looser about it. It is a big transition. You don't want to discourage them from being involved, but you also want them to understand what can they manage. And it's difficult to manage 8 clubs and 3 sports and 4 honors classes. That's a huge load to walk into coming out of, an 8th grade class. You get into high school, you're at the bottom of the totem pole, and now your plate is overflowing. So just being honest with him about what he can manage, I think is going to be very important for your brother.
How do you think the school system has developed in order to assist teens with their mental health?
I would say the push for mental health support in the schools is good. There are resources. Teachers and staff are talked to about different signs to recognize, and then they're given those referral options of, hey, if you recognize that a student is not being themselves or that they're overwhelmed, you see a dip in grades that you didn't see last semester, hey, these are the professionals that you can send them to. So the schools have school counselors as well. That's a great place to start. All the schools will have some type of social worker in there, whether they're there full-time or part-time a few days a week. And then there's outside community partners that they also can have come in. So it's just being aware of those resources and then just not being afraid to use them. But the school does want to support it. That's the easiest way for a student to be successful, is to make sure that if there's a resource they need, that they have access to it.
Awesome. Do you think there's a stigma around mental health? And what would you say to a youth that wants to reach out to somebody but is under that stigma that they can't or they shouldn't?
So to be completely honest with you, I think the stigma around mental health is not as big as students may think. One-on-one, a lot of students are very open to talking with somebody. Now, are they going to publicly explain that in a cafeteria? Maybe not. But they are very open-minded. They look out for their peers. I will say that's a big thing that I wasn't expecting to walk into in a high school setting, is there's a lot of students that will come to a teacher or a trusted adult and they will say, hey, I've noticed my friend is not being their self lately. I'm kind of concerned. Do you think somebody can talk to them? Don't tell them I told you, but can you talk to them? And then the adults can come in and kind of, not mention the other student's name, but at least can kind of come in and wrap them with some resources. So I feel like the stigma is getting better. I think the students are more apt to talk about it with a trusted adult. And I think they are. They're looking out for each other much better than they probably were 10 or 15 years ago.
How do you think we should approach a student who does have mental health issues?
When you say approach, like something you can do?
Whether it's just the student body can assist them,
Okay.
a fellow friend, or maybe even the teacher.
The biggest thing is going to be to talk to a trusted adult, in my opinion. I think if you have a trusted adult that you can go to, and whether it's a teacher or if it's a parent or another staff member, I think at least just putting it in their awareness that you think another student may or may not be struggling, that's the first step. You don't have to know exactly what's going on. You don't have to know all the ins and outs of what's impacting this student, but at least saying something to a trusted adult and then letting those adults figure out what resources they can get in place to wrap around this student. That's going to be the biggest thing. Or talking to your friend and just saying, hey, they have Miss So-and-so, or Mr. So-and-so that you could probably go talk to, I'm worried about you, and giving them that opportunity to kind of start the conversation themselves. And if they're just like, no, I don't want to do it, but you as a friend are still concerned, you can always go to that trusted adult, and those trusted adults can kind of step in and make sure that that student can get what they need.
Awesome. How do you think social media and mental health work together?
Ooh, okay. Social media, it does impact mental health, absolutely. I think the immediate access to social media right now does increase the likelihood that maybe an issue or concern is going to continue. It doesn't just disappear like maybe again it did 10 or 15 years ago. Everyone's got cell phones and cameras and videos, and so if something happens, there's a good chance that everybody's going to know, not that just the people that are there. On the flip side, there's also wonderful resources on social media, and there's a lot of really good programs and agencies that are aimed specifically at youth. So I think if it's misused, it definitely can negatively impact a student. And you have students that are struggling with maybe peer relationships or a partner relationship, and something continues to flash up on social media, and it's just back in their face and back in their face. And that is difficult to work through. That's difficult for an adult to work through. It just doesn't go away. And it's really difficult to just ignore it. But if used properly, I think it's a good place for students to lift each other up or say positive things or give compliments. And so I think it's not social media itself, personal opinion. I think it's just the way it's utilized, because it has the power to be just as positive as it is negative. And I think that's just up to us as adults and the youth to flip that script.
How do you think mental health potentially affects growth?
Absolutely does. There's steps, and there's parts of development that you kind of, you have to do step 2 before you can get to step 3. And if we're stuck in step 2 and we're stagnant and we can't develop a coping skill or a resiliency skill, getting to step 3 is, if it happens, you're not going to be 100% at step 3. So being able to meet those basic needs younger and earlier on in the process make growing and maturing a lot easier. Because you will hit a stop. You will hit a stop because you haven't fulfilled something that was supposed to be met back here in these earlier stages. And so that makes this right here, this is as high as we're going to go until we can meet these back needs, which is why I'm a huge advocate of getting support in as students are younger. So we're not 17, 18, 19 and realizing, oh man, I missed an opportunity to support and develop my skills and my resiliency back here. And now I'm really stuck and I don't know what to do. And I'm going into college, and now I'm really struggling, and all my other peers are excelling past me.
What are some ways you think we should approach the youth in order to prevent it from stopping them whenever they do turn 17?
I think situations like this Mayor's Youth Council, I think youth-led groups and organizations are really powerful, because frankly it's easier for a teenager to relate to another teenager. I understand that I'm an adult, and there's only so much I can do as an adult that comes in. I think hearing it from peers, using like a positive peer pressure instead of the negative like bullying or nagging style of peer pressure is really important. And so I think the more our generation supports youth-led organizations that talk about mental health and talk about behavioral health and the problems and issues that we're all facing, that's going to open that conversation earlier. Instead of waiting until we're in high school and we take a psychology class and we're like, oh, that makes sense now. We're not teaching psychology to elementary school kids, but if we can open that conversation and teach them the age-appropriate skills, they can then become the teacher to their peer.
What are some resources you believe that the students can use in order to help almost prevent this mental health crisis?
So resources, so like I mentioned earlier, so we do have school counselors. I can speak, I'm most familiar with the high school level, so I can speak on high school. So the high schools have school counselors, and students have access to them through, through the system that they can go in for any kind of personal issues or academic issues, and often those are linked. They're, like I said, so the schools will have some type of mental health professional along the lines of a social worker, whether that's Monday through Friday or certain days, depending on the school. Community partners are in place as well, through a bunch of different outside organizations. The teachers these trusted adults are a wonderful asset that I think sometimes get looked over because they're an algebra teacher or they're a junior English teacher, and so you assume this person can only teach me algebra, or this person can only teach me English, when in reality, that's a wonderful resource, and they can link you with something they may know about or another professional in the school. And then positive peers. Like, I can't emphasize the power that the students have over the student body in these schools. With all due respect, the students run these schools. The adults in place are there just to maintain some type of order, but it really is the students. You guys have more influence than I think you realize. You can do that positive peer pressure. You can, like I said, you can flip the script on social media. It's in our youth's hands. And I think it just is going to take a little bit more time for youth to become a little bit more comfortable with because that's a lot of power to possess. And sometimes it might seem a little scary because you feel like a lot rides on your shoulders, but it's such an opportunity to use your power to do good things and to talk to your friends when you notice something isn't right, or to grab, a trusted adult. If you see somebody struggling, or you overhear somebody in the bathroom or in a hallway, and not being afraid to kind of take that first stand and say, hey, like, why don't you talk to this person? I trust them as an adult. They're a great person, and I think they can help you. And if they can't, I think they can find somebody that can.
How do you think they would go about and approach someone if they aren't willing to speak to the adults?
So that's a good question. And I understand that, along the lines of that positive peer pressure, you guys don't want to turn your back on each other. You don't want a friend to be mad at you or upset because maybe you told a secret. And I understand that, again, as an adult. The easiest way to go about that is if you go to this trusted adult and you just say, hey, can you check on John? I don't know much more than that. Can you not mention to him that I'm the one who came up to you? And these trusted adults like myself can then seek out John. We can kind of scoot into a conversation. We can find something in common. And it can be a real natural kind of conversation. So then hopefully we can start checking on John and seeing how John's doing. And maybe if I see John in the hallway and, I can kind of talk to him, build that rapport and relationship. And that's a successful referral, right? So John has no idea that you've mentioned anything. He still trusts you. You're still a trusted person to him. But you've involved that trusted adult that can kind of give them that support that you as, a fellow youth couldn't provide.
Awesome. Well, I think that's it. Is there anything you would like to add?
I would like to say thank you for having me here, and I've said it more than once, and I'll keep saying it. I think that the power of our youth is what's going to get us through a lot of these things. I think it's a really nice and cool thing to see. Youth that are interested in mental health and youth that are interested in the well-being of their peers, and that's been a huge culture change. And so while there's still maybe some stigma around mental health, it has gotten significantly better from, the past 10 or 15 years. And it's uphill. Like we're going to crest, and, these conversations will continue, but they're not going to be as in-depth because our youth are going to be empowered, and they're going to be handling this, and they're going to know these resources without having to bring somebody like me in here to talk to you guys about it. So keep doing what you're doing. That's what I can say.
Thank you so much for your time, man.
Thank you.